You probably think two-strokes were banned from MotoGP because they were outdated or too dangerous, right? Well, I dug through decades of racing history, technical papers, and insider stories, and what I discovered completely flipped that idea on its head. Was it really because four-strokes were technically superior, or was something else at play? Let's find out. When the checkered flag fell at the Czech Grand Prix in 2003, it wasn't just the end of another MotoGP race, it was the end of an entire era. That race quietly closed the chapter on two-stroke engines, the screaming, oil-burning beasts that had defined motorcycle racing for more than 30 years. What came next was a complete shift in the soul of MotoGP. On paper, the explanation sounded reasonable. Officials said MotoGP needed to modernize, become more environmentally friendly, and stay relevant to the road bikes we see every day. Fair enough, right? But dig a little deeper, and the story gets much darker. Behind the scenes, there were corporate interests, strategic lobbying, and decisions made in boardrooms that had little to do with racing passion. Some insiders even believed that two-stroke technology was intentionally sidelined, killed off before it ever got the chance to truly evolve. See, the switch from 500cc two-strokes to 990cc four-strokes didn't come from riders or fans. It wasn't about safety or speed either. It was about business. Throughout the 1990s, major Japanese manufacturers like Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki had poured billions into developing four-stroke engines for their cars. By the time MotoGP was considering a change, these companies already had four-stroke designs perfected and ready to adapt to bikes. From their perspective, reusing and repurposing existing technology was far cheaper than continuing to develop two-strokes from scratch. But here's the thing, two-strokes weren't outdated junk. They were lightweight, insanely powerful for their size, and thrillingly raw. Many engineers believed that with proper research and cleaner fuel injection systems, two-strokes could have met emission standards and remained competitive. Unfortunately, the political tide had already turned. To really understand why two-strokes disappeared from MotoGP, you've got to go back to one of Honda's biggest flops, the NR500. Between 1979 and 1982, Honda set out to dethrone the two-stroke kings with something wild. A four-stroke race bike that used oval pistons, 8 valves per cylinder, and revved like crazy. On paper, it was a masterpiece. But what about on the track? Well, it was a total disaster. The thing was so delicate that mechanics had to work overnight, sometimes 8 to 10 hours straight, just to rebuild the engine between practice sessions. It never scored a single championship point and soon earned the nickname Never Ready. That failure was more than just embarrassing. It changed Honda's strategy. They realized they couldn't out-engineer the two-strokes within the existing rules. If they wanted to win, they had to rewrite the rulebook. And that's exactly what they did. By the late 90s, Honda was quietly developing the RC211V, a powerful four-stroke machine, while also pushing behind the scenes to make sure the new MotoGP regulations would tilt the odds in their favor. Then came the displacement deception. In 2002, the new rules allowed 990 cubic centimeters four-strokes to race against 500 cubic centimeters two-strokes. It sounds fair on paper, but think about it. This was like putting a heavyweight boxer in the ring with a middleweight and calling it a fair fight. The justification was that four-strokes needed double the displacement to match the power of a two-stroke. In theory, that made sense. A 500 cc two-stroke making about 190 horsepower should have been competitive with a 990 cc four-stroke of similar output. But theory didn't match reality. The four-strokes quickly exceeded expectations, pushing past 230 horsepower and, more importantly, delivering smoother, more usable torque across the rev range. Riders could manage the power better, stay consistent, and dominate over race distance. The two-strokes, with their wild, peaky power bands, simply couldn't keep up. And Honda's RC211V was a calculated masterstroke that changed MGPT forever. While most manufacturers were scrambling to modify their old two-stroke chassis to fit new four-stroke engines, Honda went all in. They built a completely new machine from the ground up, one that revolved entirely around their powerful new four-stroke engine. And when it finally hit the track in 2002, the results were nothing short of devastating. That year, the RC211V won 14 out of 16 races, an incredible 87.5% win rate. Valentino Rossi, riding that bike, dominated the championship so completely that it almost looked unfair. Other teams were still trying to figure out how to make the four-stroke transition work, while Honda was already miles ahead. It was timing, preparation, and a smart bit of politics. You see, Honda had reportedly poured over $100 million into developing that four-stroke program. That's a huge gamble unless you know the rules are about to change in your favor. And that's exactly what happened. The 2002 regulations were practically custom-tailored for Honda's new technology, giving them the perfect platform to showcase their RC211V's dominance. Then came the so-called emissions smokescreen. Publicly, officials claimed the move to four strokes was about reducing pollution and making racing more environmentally responsible. But when you look closely at the timing, it feels a lot more calculated. The first Euro emission standards in 1999 were mild enough that two strokes could still comply. Euro 2 in 2003 made things tougher, but some manufacturers still managed to meet the limits. Then suddenly, Euro 3 hit in 2006, and it slashed the allowable emissions by 50% overnight. And guess what? That happened right when companies were ready to launch their new four-stroke sport bikes. Coincidence? Hardly. A lot of insiders think that the emission rules were shaped by industry pressure, set up to push two strokes out while making four strokes more profitable and safe to use. But here's the biggest twist in the whole story: clean, two-stroke technology wasn't some impossible dream. It actually existed, and still does. Companies like Evinrude, for example, developed direct injection two-stroke engines for boats that were cleaner than many four strokes, burned less fuel, and still made more power. Snowmobile manufacturers pulled off similar feats. The technology was there, ready to evolve, but it was quietly locked out of the motorcycle world by regulations crafted by, ironically, the very companies that stood to profit from killing it off. And then came the marketing spin. The official excuse was that MotoGP had to become more road relevant. Sounds reasonable at first. Racing should reflect the bikes we ride on the streets, right? But here's the truth. MotoGP bikes have never been directly related to road bikes. Whether two-stroke or four-stroke, these machines are high-tech prototypes built with exotic materials, bleeding-edge electronics, and engineering methods that don't come anywhere near production bikes. What four strokes actually offered wasn't technical relevance, but marketing relevance. Manufacturers could finally brag, "Our MotoGP technology powers your street bike," even though that connection was mostly surface level. A 990 cubic centimeter V5 Honda RC211V had about as much in common with a CBR 600RR as a fighter jet does with a passenger plane. But it sold the dream, and that's what mattered to the boardrooms. The so-called road relevance argument also ignored what was happening in the real market. In the early 2000s, two-stroke bikes were still popular among everyday riders. Yamaha's RZ/RD series, Suzuki's RG models, and plenty of smaller two-stroke machines were beloved for their lightweight, simplicity, and pure aggressive character. People were forced out by regulations that strangled their future. Another argument often thrown around to justify the death of two strokes was safety. Critics claimed that two-stroke bikes were unpredictable, dangerous, and too wild to handle. They said the engines had an explosive, narrow power band that made them harder to control one wrong move, and the rear wheel could spin up or slide out. On paper, it sounded like a valid concern. But when you look closer, the story doesn't really hold up. During the 500cc era, riders had already mastered the art of taming those brutal two strokes. These were professional racers who'd spent years adapting their techniques to handle sudden bursts of power. And while yes, crashes happened, the numbers don't show that two strokes were significantly more dangerous than today's four strokes. What really changed wasn't the safety level, it was the style of crashes. Here's the irony. Modern MotoGP, supposedly safer thanks to four strokes, has actually seen crash rates increase. In 2023 alone, the number of crashes was up by 15% compared to 2022. And that season had already seen a 45% jump from the previous decade. Add sprint races to the mix, and things got even worse. After just 12 races, There were 35 instances of riders missing GPs due to injuries almost triple what used to happen in a full season. So, where's the safety in that? The truth is, today's MotoGP bikes are more powerful, faster, and aerodynamically complex than ever. The four-strokes now produce far more horsepower than the old 500cc two-strokes and can reach higher speeds. The downforce generated by their advanced aero packages also introduces new unpredictable risks like sudden front-end loss during overtakes or turbulent air upsetting stability mid-corner. But if you really want to see the cold, hard truth behind the two-stroke ban, you have to look at the money. Underneath all the talk about safety and the environment, there was a much simpler motivation profit. Four-stroke engines are far more complicated than two-strokes, and that complexity is exactly what makes them so profitable for manufacturers. Think about it. A two-stroke engine is mechanically simple, fewer moving parts, easier to build, and you can often rebuild one yourself with basic tools and a bit of know-how. It's the kind of engine that keeps costs low and puts the power in the hands of the riders and independent mechanics. But four-strokes, that's a whole different story. They need precision components, advanced machining, and specialized maintenance. Valve adjustments, timing chains, electronic diagnostics, all of that means more service costs, more expensive parts, and more dependency on the manufacturer. This means more money flowing back to them. Even in racing, the difference was massive. Back in the two-stroke days, teams were lean, small crews, fewer engineers, and bikes that could be stripped down and rebuilt overnight. Today's four-stroke MotoGP machines demand entire armies of technicians, engineers, and data analysts just to keep them running at peak performance. It's turned racing into a high-budget arms race where only the biggest players can truly compete. The result is fewer independent teams and a sport that's becoming harder for newcomers to afford. But what do you think is the saddest part of all this? Well, the technological progress of two-strokes was just hitting its stride when it got cut short. By the late 90s, engineers were developing direct fuel injection, electronic control systems, and new materials that made two-strokes cleaner, more efficient, and more reliable than ever. We were on the verge of a breakthrough pause two-strokes that could rival four-strokes not just in performance, but in emissions and economy too. And if you want proof that two-stroke technology still has life left in it, just look at KTM's modern off-road bikes. These machines are living examples of what might have been possible if two-stroke development hadn't been shut down. They feature fuel-efficient, clean-burning engines that start with ease, idle smoothly, and produce minimal smoke, all while keeping that signature lightweight punch that made riders fall in love with two-strokes in the first place. The tech clearly exists. What's stopping it? Regulations written 20 years ago that simply won't let these engines compete on a wider scale. And that's not all we lost. When two-strokes disappeared, an entire field of engineering disappeared with them. Young engineers today rarely touch a two-stroke design, and the decades of hard-earned knowledge built up over racing history are slowly fading away. It's like erasing an entire language of mechanical creativity. With fewer minds exploring that path, the motorcycle world loses not just diversity, but innovation itself. Then there's the emotional side, the sound. The sound of a 500 CWAS two-stroke screaming down a straight was pure chaos and beauty rolled into one. That sharp, high-pitched wail was the heartbeat of MGPT. You could close your eyes and instantly tell which manufacturer was on track, or even recognize a rider's throttle style just by the tone of their exhaust. When the switch to four strokes happened, that individuality vanished. The soundtrack of racing became cleaner, yes, but also quieter, blander, and more uniform. MotoGP started to sound like everything else, losing a bit of its soul in the process. And if you still doubt that the transition was manipulated, look no further than MotoGP's concession system. This rule gives weaker teams extra engines, more testing time, and relaxed development limits, essentially admitting that the playing field isn't naturally fair. It's the clearest proof that the sport's regulations were never about pure competition. They were and still are carefully managed to keep certain interests in control. If the switch to four strokes was truly natural, driven purely by better performance or efficiency, MotoGP wouldn't need so many rules to keep things balanced. But that's not the case. The fact that the sport now relies on complex concession systems and engine limits proves something. The original jump to 4 strokes came with too many built-in advantages. The deck was stacked from day one. And look at what's happening now. MotoGP is planning to reduce engine size to 850 cubic centimeters by 2027. Curious if 990 cubic centimeters 4 strokes were supposed to be the perfect formula? Why shrink them? The answer's pretty clear. The original setup was never about creating the ideal racing machine. It was about giving manufacturers, especially those heavily invested in 4-stroke tech, the upper hand. Now the organizers are trying to rein things back in to restore some balance to the competition. But the impact of that 2-stroke ban didn't stop at MotoGP, it rippled across the entire motorcycle world. Once the premier class went all in on 4 strokes, every other racing category followed. National championships, local clubs, even amateur leagues started phasing out 2 strokes, all pointing to MotoGP as the example to follow. It created a domino effect that froze 2-stroke innovation, not because the engines were outdated, but because it became too expensive and politically impossible to keep developing them. Small manufacturers, the kind that once thrived on building lightweight, affordable 2-stroke machines, either had to switch to 4-stroke development, something that required massive investment, or shut down completely. And the ripple reached even further. In developing countries, 2 strokes were once the backbone of daily transportation, cheap, easy to fix, and efficient. When the regulations tightened, those markets were forced to adopt pricier 4-stroke models, making motorcycles less affordable for millions who relied on them. Now imagine a world where the 2-stroke engine wasn't pushed off the grid, but allowed to evolve alongside the 4 strokes. Direct injection, variable exhaust valve timing, and ECU systems smart enough to fine-tune every pulse of power. That's where 2-stroke technology could have gone. Instead of the homogeneous 4-stroke dominance we see today, MotoGP might have been a playground for genuine engineering diversity. Different manufacturers chasing different philosophies, raw 2-stroke aggression versus refined 4-stroke precision. That's the kind of rivalry that could have redefined motorcycle evolution. But what happened instead? Today's MotoGP grid runs on near-identical 4-stroke, 4-cylinder engines, same configuration, similar performance curves. The differences now come from electronics, aerodynamics, and budgets. The racing is still breathtaking, sure, but it's also become more predictable, more controlled. The wild innovation that once defined the sport has given way to regulation-driven engineering, and the price was accessibility. Smaller manufacturers, pause the ones who used to experiment, to surprise have been priced out of the competition. The complexity and cost of maintaining high-performance 4-strokes are astronomical compared to the old 2-stroke machines. What was once a field of tinkerers and dreamers is now a corporate chessboard. So what's the verdict? The 2-stroke ban was a strategic one, a quiet, calculated move disguised as progress. Under the banners of emissions and modernization, manufacturers eliminated a rival technology not because it was outdated, but because it didn't fit their business models. Sure, 4-strokes brought some undeniable perks, smoother power delivery, better fuel efficiency, cleaner emissions. But what did we lose in return? We traded away the raw, unpredictable brilliance of 2-strokes, their character, their edge, their potential to evolve into something even greater. Modern direct injection 2-strokes have proven those environmental concerns could have been solved. The truth is, they weren't given a chance. Regulations didn't kill 2-strokes because they were flawed, they killed them because they didn't fit the business plan. The 2-stroke era was the last time MotoGP truly lived up to its legend pause, a sport where the bikes fought back, and only the bravest could tame them. Every race was chaos in motion, a test of both courage and control. But in trying to make the sport safer, cleaner, and easier to market, MotoGP also sanitized its soul. Yes, today's machines are marvels of precision engineering, fast, efficient, and aerodynamically flawless. But those who watched the last 500cc battles back in 2003 know the truth. Something irreplaceable vanished when that final 2-stroke screamed across the line. And the most shocking part was that loss wasn't inevitable. It was engineered carefully, deliberately, and profitably. Quick question, do you think two-strokes were banned for safety, tech, or pure politics? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're not secretly a time-traveling mechanic, hit subscribe right now. After this, choose your next ride. I recommend Why Ducati Broke MotoGP with This Impossible Engine, or let YouTube surprise you.